John Harper always dreamed of space. Ever since he was a child, the stars were his fascination. He watched every space documentary, read every article, and built models of spacecraft in his room. So, when he was chosen for the first manned mission to explore deep space, he was overjoyed. He had worked his whole life for this moment. It was the year 2042, and humanity was preparing for its biggest leap into the unknown. The ship Pioneer was designed to travel beyond Earth's solar system, to explore new worlds, and possibly make contact with extraterrestrial civilizations. John, a young astronaut, was part of this brave new era of exploration. He and his team of scientists were to survey an unexplored planet, Gather 7, which had shown signs of life during initial scans. No one knew what to expect, but that was the thrill of space exploration. As the Pioneer left Earth's orbit, the crew was filled with excitement and nervous energy. The journey was long, and the planet was far, but they were ready. Little did they know, nothing would go according to plan. The journey began as expected. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. John and the rest of the crew spent their time studying the data they collected from the ship's sensors, reviewing the mission protocols, and occasionally looking out at the stars through the observation window. The vast emptiness of space, while awe-inspiring, also carried a weight of loneliness. But John knew they were heading towards something special, something that might change humanity forever. Then, one day, everything changed. It was a routine scan when the ship's sensors detected an unusual anomaly. A massive gravitational force seemed to pull them off course. John, sitting at his station, noticed it first. The numbers on the screen were erratic, blinking in patterns that made no sense. His heart skipped a beat as he glanced around. The ship was shaking slightly, nothing too alarming, but enough to cause concern. He called over to the ship's captain, Captain Claire Matthews. "Captain, we're being pulled into something. I'm not sure what, but the gravitational pull is unlike anything we've encountered." Captain Matthews quickly assessed the situation. Her face was calm, but John could see the concern in her eyes. She immediately issued orders to engage the ship's thrusters to stabilize their position. But it was too late. The pull grew stronger, and before they knew it, the Pioneer was spiraling out of control. "Brace for impact," Captain Matthews shouted, but it was too late. The ship was caught in the force of a mysterious wormhole. John's stomach lurched as the ship was sucked into the swirling darkness. The last thing he remembered before everything went black was the deafening sound of alarms and the feeling of weightlessness. When John regained consciousness, everything was still. The ship was silent, and the familiar hum of the engines was gone. He sat up quickly, his head throbbing. The control room was in disarray, panels flickering, alarms still ringing faintly in the background. He glanced out the observation window and froze. Instead of the familiar sight of distant stars, he saw something completely new, a strange world. It was a planet unlike Earth, its surface a mix of green, blue, and golden hues, with large floating islands drifting in the sky above vast, deep oceans. He rubbed his eyes, unsure if the crash had caused him to hallucinate. But no, this was real. He was not in space anymore. He was somewhere far, far away. "Captain Matthews." "Commander Lin," John called, but his voice echoed back with no response. He rushed to the ship's emergency communication panel, but nothing worked. The ship had sustained significant damage. The controls were unresponsive, and the navigation systems were offline. Panic began to set in. Was he alone? Was everyone else okay? He checked the crew quarters, searching for his colleagues, but the ship was eerily quiet. He found no one. His heart raced, a sense of dread creeping in. He was trapped on an alien world with no way to contact Earth, and no way to know what had happened to the rest of the crew. As he stood in the control room, trying to make sense of the situation, something caught his eye through the window. A shape, a figure, floating in the air outside the ship. His eyes widened in disbelief as the figure came closer. It was humanoid in shape but had glowing skin, shimmering with bright blue light. The figure's features were unlike anything John had seen, but it seemed to be watching him. Before John could react, the figure spoke in his mind. The voice was calm, yet somehow ancient, as if it carried the weight of centuries of knowledge. "We have been waiting for you, human." John staggered back, his breath caught in his throat. Who was this? What were they? How could they communicate without speaking? The figure didn't move, but John felt the message clearly. They were not hostile. They were curious. But what did they want with him? What was going to happen next? He had no answers, only questions. And now, trapped on an alien world, he had to find a way to survive, to understand these mysterious beings, and most importantly, to somehow find a way back home. John's journey on Gathar 7 had just begun, and it would be a journey like no other. He was no longer just an astronaut. He was a pioneer, not only in space, but also in the realm of first contact. The universe was far more complex and alive than he had ever imagined, and he would have to learn quickly if he was to survive this strange, new world. John stood frozen in the control room, his eyes wide as the glowing figure outside the window slowly floated toward him. It was unlike anything he had ever seen. Tall, slender, and with an ethereal bioluminescent glow. The figure's skin shimmered with colors of blue and green, almost like the colors of the ocean beneath the floating islands in the distance. For a moment, John couldn't breathe. He had been to space, seen planets, stars, and galaxies, but nothing prepared him for this. His mind raced, but his body stayed still. The figure outside his window had spoken to him without using words, at least, not in the way humans normally did. It had communicated directly into his mind. "We have been waiting for you, human." John's heart pounded in his chest as the figure reached the ship. The figure didn't move through the air like a person would walk. Instead, it seemed to glide. As though weightless, it was as if gravity didn't apply to it at all. It hovered right next to the ship, its glowing face only a few feet from the glass. John's fingers shook as he reached for the communication panel, trying to speak to it. "Who are you? Where am I? What do you want from me?" His voice was shaky, but there was something in the air that kept him from feeling completely terrified. The figure's presence was calming, though he could still feel the weight of the unknown hanging over him. In his mind, the figure replied, "We are the Seraph, and this is Gathar 7. You are not in danger. We seek knowledge, and we have questions for you." The voice echoed in his head, so clear yet distant. It wasn't hostile. It wasn't threatening. But it was unfamiliar and strange. John's curiosity began to replace his fear. The Seraph, Gathar 7. He had heard nothing about either of them. He had been preparing to explore a different planet, one that was believed to have the possibility of sustaining life. But this was something completely different. He didn't know what to make of it, but he knew he had to find answers. He wasn't alone on this new world. There were others, somewhere out there. Without thinking, he activated the external communication system again. "Is anyone else here? I'm not alone, right? Please, tell me where the rest of my crew is." His voice was firm now, his desperation starting to break through the calmness of the situation. "The others are safe," the voice replied, "but they are not ready to meet us. Only you, John Harper, have been chosen to speak with us. You will understand soon. Come." Before John could even respond, the figure vanished from his sight, and he felt a strange pull in his chest. Without thinking, he found himself leaving the control room and heading toward the ship's exit. The ship's systems were still damaged, but he managed to open the hatch. The cool air outside hit his face, and he stepped out onto the surface of the planet, his heart racing with anticipation. Gathar 7 looked nothing like Earth. The planet's sky was a soft lavender color, and the ground beneath him was covered with soft, moss-like material that gave slightly under his boots. Strange plants surrounded him, glowing faintly in hues of purple, pink, and blue. The air was thick but breathable, carrying a strange but not unpleasant scent that reminded John of fresh rain and wildflowers. Floating above the planet's surface were massive islands, green, lush, and alive with activity, though there was no sign of anything resembling human civilization. Suddenly, the figure appeared again, this time in front of him, hovering just above the ground. "Follow us," it said, and with that, it began to float away, slowly but steadily. John didn't hesitate. He followed. They walked, or rather, John walked while the seraph glided beside him. The path ahead seemed to glow with a faint light, as if guiding him. They passed tall trees with leaves that shimmered like crystal and flowers that pulsed with a soft, soothing light. John had never seen anything like it. He tried to take it all in, but there was so much to see, so much to understand. Every step he took felt like a small discovery, but none were as incredible as the seraph. After what felt like hours, they reached a vast city built into the side of a mountain. The buildings were unlike anything John had seen, beautifully crafted, made of materials that seemed to blend perfectly with the environment. Some structures appeared to float, held up by the same mysterious force that allowed the islands to hover. There was no visible technology like Earth's cities had, but it was clear that the seraph possessed an intelligence far beyond anything humans had imagined. The figure stopped in front of a large circular building with walls made of shimmering, translucent stone. "This is where we gather knowledge. You will learn here," the seraph said. John stood there, awestruck. He had never seen anything so magnificent, so alien. "What am I supposed to learn?" he asked. "You will understand. You will learn about us, and we will learn about you." As John entered the building, he was immediately surrounded by more of the seraph, each one glowing with the same soft light. They didn't speak, but their presence was welcoming. He could feel their curiosity, their desire to know more about him and his species. It was clear they didn't understand humanity fully, but they wanted to. For hours, John was shown things he couldn't even begin to comprehend. The seraph communicated with him through images, feelings, and thoughts. It was as though they were trying to teach him in a language beyond words, beyond anything he had ever experienced. Their civilization was built on understanding, peace, and respect for all life. But there was something more, something deep and ancient that John didn't quite grasp yet. At the end of the day, the seraph spoke once more. "You are different. Your kind is full of emotion, of drive, of strength. But you also bring chaos. That is why we have waited for you, human. You will help us understand your world, and we will help you understand ours." John stood silently, contemplating the journey ahead. He wasn't just stranded on a foreign planet anymore. He was part of something much bigger than himself, something that could change humanity's future forever. And somewhere deep inside, John knew he had just stepped into a world far more incredible than he could have ever imagined. John spent the next few weeks on Gathar 7, learning from the seraph. Every day brought something new, something extraordinary. The seraph communicated with him through a mix of telepathy and shared experiences, showing him their culture, their knowledge, and their history. But despite everything he was learning, John couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. The seraph, while advanced and peaceful, didn't understand something fundamental about humanity. They could comprehend logic, reason, and science, but they couldn't understand emotions the way humans did. At first, John thought it was just a minor difference. After all, the seraph were a different species with a different way of thinking. But as time went on, he realized just how deep the gap was. The seraph would ask questions that seemed simple to John. Things like, "Why do humans fight each other?" Or, "Why do humans risk so much for the sake of progress?" They didn't understand love, anger, or ambition. They saw these emotions as unpredictable, even dangerous. John spent long hours in the seraph's library, learning about their history. It was a peaceful one, filled with moments of great discovery and harmony, but also periods of stagnation. The seraph had been on Gathar 7 for centuries, fleeing a war-torn world in search of a safe home. But during their time on the planet, they had lost something vital, something they couldn't quite name. One evening, as the sun set over the horizon, John found himself sitting in a lush garden surrounded by the glowing plants of Gather-7. The air smelled like rain and fresh earth, and the soft hum of distant energy sources filled the background. He had learned to appreciate the beauty of the planet, but there was a sense of restlessness within him. The Seraph had taught him so much, but he felt as though he wasn't being fully understood. It was then that Eril, one of the Seraph, approached him. Eril was different from the others. She had a deep curiosity about humans and was the most eager to understand John's emotions. She sat down beside him, her bioluminescent skin glowing softly in the twilight. "John, why do humans need emotion?" Eril asked in her calm, melodic voice. "Why do you let it guide your actions?" John turned to her, surprised by the question. It was one he had heard countless times since arriving on Gather-7, but this time it felt different. Eril wasn't asking to judge him or criticize. She was genuinely curious. He took a deep breath, searching for the right words. "Emotions are a part of who we are," he began slowly. "They make us human. They drive us to protect the ones we love, to stand up for what we believe in, and to push forward even when everything seems lost. Without them, we wouldn't have the courage to explore, to create, to dream." Ariel listened carefully, her glowing eyes fixed on him. "But do emotions not bring pain as well? They cause you to hurt, to fear, to destroy." John nodded, understanding her point. "Yes, emotions can lead to pain, but they also lead to growth. We learn from our mistakes. Without the struggles, we wouldn't understand happiness, love, or peace. Emotions teach us about ourselves, about the world. They're not perfect, but they're ours." For a long moment, Eril was silent. She looked out at the glowing plants around them, her thoughts deep. "I am learning, John. I see now that your emotions are not weaknesses, as we once thought, but they are a part of your strength, your will to survive, your creativity, your ability to adapt. We have been so focused on peace and stability that we forgot the value of change, the value of challenge." John smiled slightly. "That's it. We humans thrive on challenges. We don't shy away from difficulty, even when it seems impossible. And that's why we can achieve things others might think impossible." Ariel looked at him with a mix of awe and wonder. "I think we can learn from each other, John. You have much to teach us, just as we have much to offer you." John felt a sense of hope rise within him. Perhaps this wasn't just about surviving on an alien planet. Perhaps it was about forging a true bond between their species, a bond built on mutual understanding. The Seraph had much to offer humanity with their advanced technology and knowledge, but humanity had something they lacked: the ability to change, to grow, and to push forward in the face of adversity. Over the next few weeks, John began to teach the Seraph about human emotions in greater detail. He explained how emotions could lead to both destruction and creation, how love could bind people together, but also how fear could tear them apart. The more he shared, the more the Seraph seemed to understand. They began to ask deeper questions, to explore ideas they had never considered before. But even as their understanding grew, John felt a deeper unease. While the Seraph were learning from humanity's emotional depth, they were also afraid of what it meant. They feared the chaos that emotions could bring, the wars, the suffering, the unpredictable consequences. The Seraph were cautious, reluctant to embrace the full extent of what they were learning. One evening, John and Ariel had a long conversation beneath the stars. "We must be careful," Ariel said quietly. "What if we bring the same chaos to your world that we experienced on ours? What if we share too much too soon?" John understood her fear. It was the same fear that had been in his heart when he first arrived. But he also knew that if humanity was to reach its full potential, it needed the Seraph's help. He couldn't let that fear stop them from moving forward. "I don't think we have to be afraid," John said softly. "If we're careful, if we work together, We can build something better. We can use both our strengths, your wisdom and our drive, and create something that helps both of our worlds." Ariel didn't respond immediately, but when she did, her voice was filled with resolve. "You are right, John. Perhaps it is time for us to embrace the unknown. Together." In that moment, John realized that the bond between humanity and the Seraph was fragile but strong. It was a bond built on trust, understanding, and the willingness to change. But it was also a bond that could change the course of both their futures. As they moved forward, they would face challenges together, learning from one another. And perhaps, just perhaps, they could create a new future, one that neither the Seraph nor humanity had ever imagined. Weeks turned into months, and John continued to live among the Seraph on Gather 7. The alien world had become a strange but comfortable home. John's daily life was a mix of learning and teaching, as he shared human emotions, history, and dreams with the Seraph, while absorbing their wisdom, knowledge, and way of life. The connection between humanity and the Seraph was growing, but it was fragile, built on a shared understanding that was still developing. Ariel, one of the Seraph's leading figures, had become John's closest ally. She was the first to embrace the idea that emotions, despite their potential for destruction, were essential to the drive and spirit of humanity. They spent many hours together, discussing everything from art to war, from love to conflict. She was beginning to grasp the complexity of the human heart, while John was fascinated by the Seraph's peaceful philosophy and technological advancements. But even as they grew closer, there were still doubts, lingering fears. The Seraph were an ancient race, cautious in their ways, and John could sense the hesitation in them. While they were open to learning from humanity, they feared the chaos that emotions could bring. Their world had once been destroyed by conflict, and they didn't want to repeat those mistakes. One day, while John and Ariel were walking through the glowing gardens of the Seraph city, they came across a group of Seraph gathered in front of a large circular stone. The stone was covered with intricate carvings and emitted a soft, pulsating light. John had seen these stones before. They were central to the Seraph's culture and history. "This is the stone of reflection," Ariel explained, her voice filled with reverence. "It holds the memories of our people, the history of our rise and fall. We use it to reflect on our mistakes, to learn from them." John looked at the stone, its surface glowing as if alive. He had been curious about it since his arrival, but had never been allowed close. Now, standing in front of it, he could feel its power, its ability to hold the weight of an entire civilization's past. "What do you see when you look into it?" John asked, his voice low. Ariel placed her hand on the stone, and for a moment her eyes closed. Then she spoke, her voice tinged with sadness. "I see the war that destroyed our home. I see the division, the hatred, the endless struggle. We thought we were doing the right thing, but in the end, we lost everything." John didn't speak for a long time. He could feel the weight of her words, the deep sorrow that had haunted the Seraph for so long. They had fled their war-torn world to find peace, to create a new life on Gather 7. But peace came at a price that seemed to have erased the Seraph's true understanding of humanity. "The thing is," John began slowly, "emotions are part of who we are. We can't just ignore them. Yes, they cause pain, but they also lead to joy, to connection, to progress. If we try to erase our emotions, we lose a piece of ourselves." Ariel turned to him, her glowing eyes filled with curiosity. "But what if we don't have to experience pain to understand joy? What if we could find a way to be without conflict?" John paused, thinking carefully. "I don't know. But what I do know is that without emotions, without conflict, we wouldn't have art, music, or dreams. We wouldn't have the drive to explore the stars, to build cities, to fight for the things that matter. Emotions, the good and the bad, shape us. They make us strive for better, even when it's hard." Ariel's eyes softened as she listened. For the first time, she seemed to understand. Perhaps, just perhaps, The seraph needed to embrace emotion, not to control or suppress it, but to understand it, to grow from it. John had shown her that there was value in the very things the seraph had been running from. We've been so focused on stability, on avoiding mistakes, that we've forgotten the strength that comes from facing them, Ariel said quietly. Perhaps it is time to look forward, not backward. John nodded. Exactly. We can learn from the past, but we can't let it control our future. As they stood there, in the glowing garden of Gather 7, a shift seemed to occur between them. It was subtle, but real. Ariel's words held a new sense of hope. She was no longer afraid of the chaos that emotions could bring. She had seen, through John's eyes, that they were necessary for growth. Over the next few weeks, the seraph began to change. They were still cautious, still thoughtful, but they started to incorporate the idea that emotion wasn't something to fear. It wasn't just about survival, it was about living. John had shown them that there was strength in vulnerability, strength in embracing what made humanity so unique. At the same time, John felt a growing sense of responsibility. He wasn't just a human stranded on an alien world anymore. He was a bridge between two civilizations, one ancient and wise, the other full of passion and potential. The bond he was forging with the seraph was fragile, yes, but it was also filled with promise. If they could learn from each other, there was no telling what they could achieve together. One evening, as John and Ariel stood on a high platform overlooking the vast expanse of Gather 7's landscapes, Ariel turned to him, her voice serious. "John, I have been thinking about the future," she said. "You are a part of our world now, just as we are a part of yours. But I wonder, what will humanity think of us when we send you back? Will they be ready to accept us? Will they fear us?" John looked out at the horizon, the stars beginning to twinkle in the distance. "I don't know. But I do know this. We're not just sending knowledge back to Earth. We're sending hope, a chance for something new. It might take time, but I believe they will understand." Ariel looked at him, a small, hopeful smile forming on her face. "Then we must ensure that both our peoples are ready. Together, we can create something greater than either of us could achieve alone." John smiled back, his heart swelling with a sense of purpose. This was more than just survival. It was the beginning of a new future, one where humanity and the seraph would share their strengths and dreams, and together they would change the course of their worlds forever. The months continued to pass on Gather 7, and with each day, John felt himself changing. His life on the alien planet had become more than just a survival story. It had become a journey of discovery, not only about the seraph, but also about himself. As he worked alongside Ariel and the other seraph, teaching them about humanity's strengths and weaknesses, he began to see a clearer vision for the future. It wasn't just about bridging the gap between two species, it was about creating something that could shape the future for both. One afternoon, while walking through the fields of glowing plants, John felt a sense of restlessness. The seraph were progressing in their understanding of humanity, but there was still so much they didn't know. They had become more open to emotions, more willing to embrace the complexities of human nature, but they still lacked the one thing that had always set humans apart: the ability to make mistakes, learn from them, and grow stronger. John had spent hours explaining to them how failures were an important part of human progress. But the seraph had difficulty understanding this. They were a civilization built on stability, and their history was defined by their avoidance of conflict. They believed that by avoiding mistakes, they could create a perfect society. But John knew that perfection wasn't the answer. He knew that true growth came from facing adversity head-on. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a soft orange glow across the landscape, John met with Ariel. They stood together at the edge of the city, overlooking the peaceful, floating islands. There was a sense of quiet in the air, as if the planet itself was waiting for something. "Ariel, I've been thinking," John began, his voice steady but filled with concern. "We can't just focus on stability. The seraph have learned a lot from us. but there's still something missing. The ability to take risks, to move forward even when we're not sure of the outcome. Ariel looked at him, her eyes reflecting the light of the setting sun. You mean the courage to face the unknown? John nodded. Exactly. The Seraph have the knowledge and wisdom, but they're afraid of taking chances. They've been so focused on avoiding conflict that they've forgotten how to embrace change, how to embrace the unknown. They need to understand that sometimes failure is a part of success. Ariel was silent for a moment, clearly deep in thought. Then she spoke quietly, her voice tinged with uncertainty. But if we embrace failure, we risk repeating the mistakes of our past. We risk causing harm, chaos, destruction. John's heart ached as he understood her fear. The Seraph had seen the worst of what conflict could do. Their homeworld had been torn apart by war, and they had fled to Gathar 7 in search of peace. The idea of returning to conflict, of risking the safety they had worked so hard to achieve, was terrifying for them. I know, John said softly, but I've learned something here. Emotions, mistakes, failure, they all have their place. It's not about embracing chaos, it's about embracing the chance to grow. The chance to move forward, even when we don't have all the answers. Humanity didn't get to where we are by avoiding risks. We got here by taking them. Ariel looked at him, her expression a mixture of doubt and curiosity. So, you're saying that failure is part of our journey, that we should allow it? John nodded again, his eyes meeting hers. Yes, but we don't have to let failure define us. It's just a step along the way. And when we fail, we learn. We rise up and try again. That's what gives us strength. For a long moment, Ariel was silent. Then she turned to face the distant horizon, her glowing form standing still against the backdrop of the setting sun. I want to believe in this. I want to believe that embracing failure will lead to something better. But it's difficult for us. We've spent so long trying to avoid the pain that comes with it. I understand, John said, his voice soft. It's not easy. But maybe that's where we can help each other. Maybe humanity can teach the Seraph that failure doesn't have to be feared. It can be a teacher. Ariel turned back to him, her eyes filled with resolve. Perhaps you are right. Perhaps it is time for the Seraph to embrace what we've been running from for so long. We must learn to accept the unknown, the risks, and yes, even the failures. John smiled, a sense of relief washing over him. It wasn't going to be easy, but it felt like the first step towards something truly transformative. The Seraph weren't just learning from humanity's successes, they were learning from its mistakes too. And in doing so, they were beginning to understand that life wasn't just about avoiding pain, it was about growing through it. Over the next few weeks, the Seraph slowly began to change. They started to embrace the idea of risk, of failure, of growth. They began to see the value in taking chances, even if it meant not always succeeding. It wasn't a quick or easy process, but it was happening. And for John, that was a victory in itself. Meanwhile, on Earth, the situation was becoming more complicated. John's crew, who had been in contact with him intermittently since his arrival on Gathar 7, were beginning to worry. They had not heard from him in weeks, and there were concerns about his safety. Some even feared that he had been lost to the planet forever. But John knew he couldn't return just yet. There was still so much to do, so much to teach. He knew that when the time came, the Seraph would be ready. And so would humanity. One evening, as the stars sparkled brightly above them, John and Ariel stood together once more, watching the peaceful glow of Gathar 7. They had come a long way, but there was still much work to be done. We're not finished yet, John said, his voice full of determination. But we're getting there. Ariel smiled, her glowing eyes reflecting the stars above. Yes, together, we will build something that will change both our worlds forever. John nodded, his heart filled with hope. The future was uncertain, but he was no longer afraid. With the Seraph by his side, he knew anything was possible. As time passed, The changes John had hoped for began to take root among the Scifi. Their understanding of humanity had deepened. The once cautious race, fearful of conflict and change, was beginning to realize that life was about more than stability. It was about growth, and sometimes growth meant taking risks. John had shown them the importance of embracing the unknown, of facing challenges, and even learning from failure. However, while the Scifi were evolving, so was John's role in their society. No longer just an outsider trying to survive, he had become a symbol of something larger, a bridge between two worlds, two ways of thinking. He had come to Gather 7 to learn from the Scifi. But now, it seemed, he was teaching them just as much, if not more. One evening, after another long day of shared knowledge and conversation, John sat alone on the balcony of his quarters, looking out at the glowing skies of Gather 7. The stars twinkled like distant lanterns, each one a reminder of the vast universe that stretched beyond. He often found himself lost in thought during these quiet moments. The Scifi were progressing, yes, but John couldn't shake the feeling that something else was at play. They were ready to embrace human emotion, to understand the value of growth through mistakes, but there was still a question lingering in his mind. What would Earth think of all this? His thoughts were interrupted when Ariel quietly approached him. Her soft footsteps were nearly silent as she stood beside him, her luminescent skin casting a faint glow in the darkness. "John," she began, her voice filled with concern. "I've been thinking." John turned to her, giving her a small, reassuring smile. "What's on your mind, Ariel?" Ariel hesitated for a moment before speaking, as if choosing her words carefully. "You've taught us so much, more than we could have imagined. But there is still so much uncertainty. What if we are too different from your people? What if, despite everything we've learned, they don't accept us?" John sighed softly, understanding her worry. He had felt the same uncertainty. The Scifi were a peaceful, advanced race, but humanity, as he knew, often viewed things they didn't understand with fear and suspicion. He had no doubt that Earth's reaction to the Scifi would be complicated at best and dangerous at worst. But John believed in the potential for understanding, for a future where both species could coexist. "I don't know what Earth will think," he admitted, his voice serious. "I can't predict how people will react. But what I do know is this: humanity has always been open to change. We've had our challenges, our wars, our mistakes, but we've also had moments of greatness. We've always managed to move forward, to learn, and to adapt. If we could face our own mistakes and grow stronger, I believe humanity can do the same with the Scifi." Ariel looked at him, her eyes searching his face as if looking for the certainty she couldn't quite find within herself. "And what if they reject us? What if humanity cannot accept us, no matter how much we've learned?" John smiled, a glimmer of hope in his eyes. "Then we'll prove them wrong. We'll show them that understanding is possible. It won't be easy, but we'll build bridges, together." Ariel remained silent for a moment, her mind processing his words. Finally, she nodded. "Perhaps you are right. Perhaps together, we can change the way both of our worlds see each other." John didn't speak again, but as he looked out at the night sky, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. He wasn't just trying to survive anymore. He was working toward something bigger, something that could change not just his life, but the lives of both the Scifi and humanity. The following days were filled with more discussions and shared efforts to prepare for the eventual meeting between the Scifi and humanity. John had started working with the Scifi to create an understanding of their culture and values, something that could help humanity see them not as aliens, but as equals. It was a difficult task, breaking down centuries of fear and suspicion that humanity had toward the unknown, but it was necessary. John knew that Earth would be skeptical. They wouldn't just accept the Scifi without questions. They would want to know everything about them, every detail. They would need to understand their history, their technology, and their intentions. So he began writing. Every night, he would sit at a desk in his quarters and type out reports and observations, creating documents that explained the Serif's culture, their peaceful nature, and their ability to grow through challenges. He wrote about the mistakes the Seraph had made in their past and how they had learned from them, just as humanity had. He spoke of the promise of cooperation, of what could be achieved if the two species worked together. But there were still fears, not just from the Seraph, but from John himself. What if he had misjudged humanity's readiness? What if the humans saw the Seraph as a threat rather than an opportunity? The risks of failure were high, and John felt the weight of that responsibility every day. One day, as John and Eril were walking through the Seraph city, a message came in from Earth. The familiar beep of his communication device echoed in the quiet of the city. John immediately pulled it from his pocket and activated it, his heart racing. The message was from his commanding officer, General Hayes. It was brief, but clear. "We've received your reports, John. We need you to come home. There are too many questions, too much uncertainty. The situation is becoming critical." The word sent a chill down John's spine. It was happening. Earth was reacting. But was it fear or curiosity? And what would he do now? Ariel, sensing his unease, looked at him. "What does it mean, John?" she asked softly. He looked at her, his face filled with resolve. "It means that the time has come. We have to face humanity's fears. We can't hide from the unknown anymore." As the communication ended, John felt the weight of his decision more than ever. This wasn't just about him or the Seraph. It was about the future of both species. Whatever happened next would shape the course of history. And John was ready to face it head-on. The time for doubt was over. The time for action had begun. The journey back to Earth was long and filled with uncertainty. John sat in the quiet of the ship's observation room, staring out into the vast expanse of space. The stars seemed endless, stretching out in all directions, but it wasn't the stars that occupied his thoughts. It was the future. The moment of truth was near. Soon, he would return to Earth, the place he had once called home, but now seemed so distant. He had spent so much time on Gather 7, learning from the Seraph, teaching them about humanity, and growing alongside them. But now, he was carrying more than just his own hopes and dreams. He was carrying the hopes of both worlds. Earth and the Seraph were on the brink of something important, something that could change the course of their histories forever. As the ship neared Earth, the tension in John's chest grew. He knew that the Seraph's arrival would not be met with open arms. The people of Earth had always feared the unknown, and they would have many questions. What did these aliens want? Could they be trusted? What would they bring to humanity's future? John's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps. Eril walked into the room, her soft glow casting a gentle light in the dim space. She looked as calm and composed as ever, though John could sense the unease behind her eyes. "We're almost there," John said, turning to her with a forced smile. Eril nodded, her voice steady but tinged with concern. "I understand the importance of this moment, John, but I still worry. What if Earth does not accept us? What if we are rejected before we can prove ourselves?" John reached out and placed a hand on her shoulder, offering a comforting smile. "We've prepared as much as we can, and we've learned from our mistakes. Both of our species have made mistakes in the past. Now we have to show humanity that we're ready to move forward together." Eril looked at him, her glowing eyes filled with a quiet determination. "I believe in you, John. I believe in us." John's heart swelled with gratitude. He had come so far from the man who had crash-landed on this alien world, lost and afraid. Now, standing beside Eril, he felt ready for whatever came next. It wasn't just about him anymore. It was about the future of both species, humanity and the Seraph, and what they could achieve together. The ship entered Earth's atmosphere with a soft rumble. The familiar blue and green of the planet came into view, and John couldn't help but feel a surge of emotion. He was home, but it wasn't the same Earth he had left behind. He had changed, and so had the Seraph. They had all learned something important, something that would shape their futures in ways they could not yet fully understand. The landing was smooth, and as the ship touched down on Earth's surface, John's heart raced. He knew that this was the moment where everything would change. A team of Earth's leaders was waiting for them. They were cautious, watching the ship with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. John stepped out of the ship first, his boots hitting the Earth's soil with a sense of finality. Ariel followed, her presence calm and steady, but her eyes betrayed the same nervousness that John felt. The leaders of Earth were silent for a moment, their eyes scanning the seraph, then John. Finally, a tall man in a military uniform stepped forward. "You have returned," he said, his voice neutral. "But you must understand, we have many questions and many fears." John nodded, taking a deep breath. "I understand, but I've been with them. These people, the seraph, for months. I've learned so much from them. They're not a threat. They're not here to conquer or destroy. They want to learn, just like we do. And together, we can build a future that benefits us both." There was a long silence, and John could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. The leaders of Earth exchanged looks, their expressions unreadable. Then the tall man spoke again. "You say they want to learn, but can we trust them?" John turned to Ariel, who stood quietly beside him, her eyes calm but filled with a quiet strength. He could see that she was ready to speak, but he knew this moment was his. He had to be the one to bridge the gap between Earth and the seraph. "I know what you're thinking," John said, his voice strong. "You're thinking about all the things that could go wrong. The risks, the unknown. But I've lived among the seraph. I've seen their history, and I've seen how much they've changed. They've learned from their past mistakes, just like we have. They're not perfect, but neither are we." The leaders of Earth were still silent, their gazes fixed on him. John felt the weight of their scrutiny, but he didn't falter. He had faith in what he was saying. He had faith in both the seraph and humanity, and it was that faith that he knew could bring them together. Finally, the man in the military uniform nodded. "We will take you at your word, John. But know this, we will be watching. We will be studying, questioning, and ensuring that this alliance is truly what you say it is." Owen nodded, relieved that they were willing to listen. It wasn't the acceptance he had hoped for, but it was a start. They were willing to give the seraph a chance, just as John had given them one. As the leaders of Earth turned and began to speak with the seraph, John stood beside Ariel, watching as the two species began their first real conversation. The path ahead would be difficult. There would be challenges, misunderstandings, and fears to overcome. But this was the beginning of something new. John had shown the seraph the value of taking risks, of embracing change, and now he would show Earth that the unknown didn't have to be feared. Together, they would take the first steps toward a future built on understanding and cooperation. It wasn't going to be easy, but as John stood there, watching the first steps of two worlds coming together, he knew that it was worth it. The future had begun, and for the first time, he felt hopeful about what was to come.